Moses Hess served as an editor and Paris correspondent for the Rhine Gazette from 1842 to early 1843. His articles focused on politics, society, and the Jewish question. In April 1842, the Rhine Gazette published his essay, The Riddle of the 19th Century. He wrote that the central issue of the 19th century was freedom and equality, as raised by the French Revolution. Since the July Revolution of 1830, ideas of freedom and equality had been steadily advancing in the minds of people in England, France, and Germany. His anonymously published essay, The Question of Centralization in Germany and France, May 17. Rhine Gazette argued that whether a state is centralized concerns whether its laws sacrifice individual freedom. If individuals truly conformed to their essential nature as human beings, he posited, their personal freedom would be indistinguishable from public freedom, would never conflict with the law, and the law would not be an external imposition, but rather their own will expressed. In such a sound society, the highest state authority would be superfluous. Its form would not be a state, yet the state itself ought precisely to cultivate this ideal among the people. He described the state as having both positive and negative aspects. It could be positive, a people's educational institution, legislating to remove obstacles to freedom. In this case, centralization was the best guardian of individual freedom and the enemy of dictatorship, selfishness, local prejudices, and caste attitudes. Conversely, it could be negative and reactionary, with law becoming arbitrary, centralized power violating sacred individual rights, and freedom degenerating into selfish caprice. In this form, exemplified by contemporary Germany, the state itself became the greatest obstacle to freedom and progress. In Germany, which had experienced the Reformation, centralization was abolished to foster individual freedom. One could hope that peoples would continually develop towards a rich and rational state, where their unique character and self-awareness become strengthened and perfected. Hess' essay clearly reflected the idealist historical outlook of the young Hegelians, which Karl Marx, a specialist in legal philosophy who was then developing historical materialism, could not accept. Marx criticized it in his Rhine Gazette article, The Centralization Question. He asserted that the primary difficulty of any era's pressing problem lies not in finding the answer, but in correctly formulating the question. The reactionaries of any epoch accurately reflect the spirit of the times, Marx argued, just as dogs serve as accurate barometers for measuring the weather. To the public, it seemed as though it was the reactionaries who posed the problem. Marx accused the author of failing to proceed from concrete facts, instead substituting an abstract and utopian world picture for the real world. He charged that the author attempted to dissolve the conflict between the individual and the state, with the fiction of some sort of upright people. If one assumed the people consisted entirely of upright individuals, the author claimed, from such a lofty perspective, all laws, written statutes, central state power, and even the state itself would vanish, and the problem would be solved. The author termed this view the philosophical viewpoint, which Marx condemned as confusing philosophy with fantasy. The fiction of a people composed wholly of upright men was utterly alien to philosophy, Marx argued, accusing Hess of surreptitiously smuggling his own abstract concept into philosophy. Marx's critique did not sway Hess, who continued discussing national character. On June 12, he published German and French daily papers in the Rhine Gazette. Germans, Hess wrote, are firm, substantial, and clear in theory, but unsteady, erroneous, and confused in practice. Most popular Germany writers, like Lessing, Schiller, and Byrne, never started from practice, but from theory. Conversely, theoretical matters were what was practical, popular, and beneficial in Germany. Practical progress in Germany lacked any historical or popular foundation. Neither existing laws nor political education could form an effective public opinion to guarantee progress. Therefore, theory, knowledge, and intellectual cultivation needed to be advanced to pave the way for true future practice. Britain, like Germany, saw millions theoretically oppose existing laws in newspapers and petitions, but this remained purely theoretical, far from practice or revolution. Though Britain had greater press freedom than France, there was tolerance for the contradiction between theory and practice, lacking an impulse to immediately realize convictions. Germany's situation was worse than England's. In France, theory and practice moved in lockstep, with theory often lagging behind practice. The French lived not in theory but in reality. Public opinion expressed political demands, even signifying revolution. Existing institutions gave voice to public opinion. Thus, Hess concluded, strict press laws were meaningless in Germany and merely hampered German theoretical thinking. Despite this, Hess remained revolutionary and progressive. On June 26, he published on the impending disaster in England, the deep divide between rich and poor, the moneyed aristocracy, and mass poverty, Hess argued, were the root causes of social misery. Industry had shifted from the hands of the people to the machines of capitalists. Commerce passed from small proprietors to large capitalists. This social ill, recognized by German thinkers and French public opinion, had erupted practically in Britain. The extreme hardship of the English people was reaching its breaking point. He declared that all political reforms, any form of government, could not cure this malady because it was social, not political. Germans coolly contemplated it and were glad they still had time to think. Frenchmen passionately strove to act ahead of history, enthusiastically embracing the ideas of Fourier, Saint-Simon, and communism. In England, history wielded its usual might, the great destroyer and creator of all social relations. On July 15, his On State and Religion asserted that defenders of religion saw it as universal truth. Apart from reason and philosophy, what else could be universal? A state, he contended, is either based on mysticism and religion, or on the public realm, reason, and morality. On September 11, his article The Political Parties in Germany identified a reactionary faction clinging to the medieval religious order, the historical school in jurisprudence, romantics in literature, seeking to restore absolute rule by stirring up passions among the uneducated lower classes. This faction had already lost its foothold among the middle classes. Its opposite was the Rationalist Party, the philosophical radicals, recently joined by constitutional liberals, the National Party, and the so-called Practical Party. South German liberalism, originating in the French Revolution, was thus already outdated for 19th century practice. The July Revolution had shown that the French Revolution aimed at middle-class rule. See Le's question, what is the third estate? Hence, its inevitable centrism. The pressing issue of the 19th century, Hess argued, was popular impoverishment, the enslavement of the majority, demanding rule by the many, not the middle class, requiring a new principle. While this new principle vaguely existed in Germany, not yet formed, it manifested as nationalist tendencies. This national party, however, shared significant affinity with the medieval reactionaries. Both targeted the blind, unconscious masses. Reactionaries used the national party as their instrument. The practical party focused on material interests and industry. Where the national party prioritized material interests in the name of nationality, the practical party praised the German national character for the sake of its material interests. Regardless of political differences, Hess welcomed the progress of German political consciousness, which created the conditions for parties, whose struggles further fueled progress. He concluded that if North America failed to overcome the antagonism between social poverty and the moneyed aristocracy, as true freedom, its freedom would be attributed solely to the bounty of the New World, not its inherent constitution. That bounty was finite. The moneyed aristocracy, confronting the populace as banks, though not yet dominant, was an established trend. Hess also fundamentally rejected any compromise, opposing centrism and political liberalism. His critique, however, stemmed not from subjective idealism, absolute freedom, but from a revolutionary and socialist perspective. According to Hess, neither the French Revolution nor constitutional monarchy could achieve this ideal form of state. Political liberalism, he insisted, could not solve social problems. Liberalism has not liberated people from slavery, which persisted until the 19th century. Not only feudal absolutism needs reform. The entire disorganized state of social life demands transformation. This was Hess at this point, a blend of socialism, utopian humanist communism derived from Feuerbach, and Hegel's rationalist conception of the state. He later became a major representative of German utopian socialism. In contrast, Marx, at this stage, held Hegel's rationalist view of the state, was forming an embryonic materialist legal and historical philosophy, humanist materialism, influenced by Feuerbach. Marx was not yet deeply interested in socialism or communism. Hess' studies of socialism, communism, and economic issues predated Marx, leading many later observers to claim that the young Marx was guided towards communism by Hess. But we see Marx advancing steadily while Hess stagnated. The root cause lay in the petty bourgeois intellectuals' elitism, utopianism, and neglect of the proletariat. Even the group known as the Free Die Freien, themselves more utopian, criticized Hess' philosophy of action for allegedly mimicking Spinoza by linking mental activity too closely to reality, failing to see the omnipotence of mental activity. Mikhail Bakunin, later the father of Russian anarchism, arrived in Berlin in 1840. A group of young Russian intellectuals studied contemporary Western European philosophy in Germany during this period, including Herzen, Ogarev, Turgenev, Bakunin, and Belinsky, all future luminaries of Russian social movements. In autumn 1841, Bakunin met Ruge that winter. He attended Schelling's lectures and immersed himself in Hegel. In 1842, he moved to Dresden, met Ruge again, joined the young Hegelians, who Ruge found superior to all the Berlin old sticklers. Bakunin shared basic tendencies with Hess, but lacked political and social experience, making his views more nebulous. In October, he wrote a long piece, The Reaction in Germany, for Ruge's Deutsche Jarbschur. Like Edgar Bauer and Hess, Bakunin criticized the just milieu. He declared that the fundamental antagonism of the age was freedom versus reaction versus democracy. Contemporary history was governed by Hegel's affirmation and negation, the opposition of the existing order and revolution. These were irreconcilable. Centrism was incompatible with the dialectical development of history, which sharpened contradictions, excluding intermediate parties. Contradiction possessed driving force for practice. The intensification of class conflict meant the poor would inevitably begin demanding their rights, and become the revolutionary class driving the dialectic onward. He illustrated, the left says 2 + 2 = 4. The right says 2 + 2 = 6. The impartial center says 2 + 2 = 5. He prophesied, even in Russia, in our vast, little understood, snowy empire, perhaps a great future lies ahead, storm clouds are gathering. This article clearly articulated the revolutionary aspects of Hegelian philosophy, the fruit of Bakunin's 7 years studying German philosophy. When it reached Moscow, Herzen wrote in his diary, "He has washed away his past sins, I am completely reconciled with him." Belinsky remarked, though their paths to finding God differed, they finally met in the same paradise, and wrote to Bakunin to make peace. Botkin did likewise. The article also marked his farewell to German philosophy. He turned towards the French Revolution. Over the past year, he had become acquainted with French socialist and communist doctrines, Saint-Simon, Fourier, Proudhon, Leroux. Bakunin believed these French utopian schemes were more practical and concrete than abstract German speculative systems. Even Feuerbach himself was unreal and purely rational. Other German philosophers with their theoretical prescriptions for salvation were mere farce. The future belonged to men of action. A new friendship cemented this shift. Georg Herwegh, an activist poet of the Young Germany movement like Bern, an early favorite of Engels, was undertaking his famous nationwide tour. He met Bakunin in Dresden in October. They conversed deeply, became close friends, and by December Bakunin had departed for Switzerland with Herwegh. Bakunin and Hess had much in common, a tendency to blend anarchism and communism, and crucially, their character. Both lacked the firm, profound conviction and unreserved spirit of sacrifice that characterized Marx and Engels. Hess wrote articles against anti-French sentiment while simultaneously composing new tunes for Becker's song, They Shall Not Have It. Bakunin wrote on communism while currying favor with Dresden aristocracy. Since the suppression of the Halle yearbook, Ruge's Deutsche Yearbook has maintained a radical stance. In early August, the publisher Wigand warned Ruge of the journal's imminent prohibition and asked despairingly whether to continue the struggle against the growing reactionary tide. Ruge wrote, "Last Saturday, my yearbook's publishing license was formally revoked. Almost everyone supports the reactionaries, which only emboldens them. Look at Portugal, where freedom was strangled. Spain is little better. In England, the Tories won against the odds. Gazette's position remains strong, backed by solid majorities. Savigny became minister. Puchta went to Berlin. Bruno Bauer was dismissed. Feuerbach withdrew to the countryside. I am almost alone, and the most unprincipled elements are the most popular." Yet, Ruge resolved to continue the fight. In August 1842, he wrote a critique of Hegel's philosophy of right, the defect of Hegelian philosophy, especially his philosophy of right, is its detachment from living history. Hegel reduced historical facts to logical categories, concepts, absolutizing the state, treating certain state institutions as eternal forms severed from history. Ruge argued that Hegel illegitimately presented hereditary monarchy, primogeniture, a bicameral system as logical necessities instead of explaining and critiquing them as historical products. Any conception of the state or philosophy, he insisted, was a product of history. Spirit historically embodied itself in concrete state forms. While the general concept of the state could be explained via abstract notions of spirit development, real state institutions were historical categories whose developmental dynamic lay solely in the critique of their existence. Critical philosophy must push history forward through such critique of existing institutions. He concluded, we must combine French practical spirit with German theoretical spirit, fuse politics with critical philosophy. This formula German critique French Revolution was the common ground for a group of young Hegelian leftists, Hess, Bakunin, Ruge, and others. It also became the guiding idea for Marx and Ruge's collaboration on the German-French yearbook after the suppression of the Rhine Gazette.